A Boeing 747 sits on the runway, engines roaring, ready for takeoff. Through thick fog, the pilot pushes the thrust levers forward. Headlights cut through the mist. The aircraft accelerates past the point of no return, a speed where stopping becomes nearly impossible. But at that exact moment, through the fog, a shadow begins to emerge. Another Boeing 747. On the same runway, coming from the opposite direction, just meters away. What happened next is almost impossible to imagine. The question is, how did it come to this? What was air traffic control doing? And what single mistake gave birth to the deadliest accident in aviation history? This is the tragic story of the Tenerife Airport disaster. Our story begins one day before the disaster, March 26, 1977. Pan Am Flight 1736, a Boeing 747 jumbo jet, takes off from Los Angeles International Airport. The flight plan is straightforward. Land in New York to pick up passengers, then continue across the Atlantic Ocean to the Canary Islands, specifically to the city of Las Palmas. This is a charter flight, completely booked. Most passengers are older travelers looking forward to enjoying a cruise ship vacation in Las Palmas. Las Palmas is the capital of the Canary Islands Spanish territory. Located about 60 miles off the coast of Morocco, it's famous worldwide for its tropical climate, stunning beaches, and year-round sunshine. But in 1977, beneath the beauty of the Canary Islands, political tension was simmering. A separatist group, known as the MPAIAC, was fighting for Canary Islands' independence from Spain, and they often used violence to make their point. It was one of their violent acts that would set this disaster in motion. Pan Am Flight 1736 departed JFK International Airport in New York with its passengers and crew. In the cockpit, 56-year-old Captain Victor Grubbs, 39-year-old First Officer Robert Bragg, and 46-year-old flight engineer George Warnes. Behind them, 13 flight attendants cared for 380 passengers. As Pan Am 1736 cruised over the Atlantic Ocean toward the Canary Islands, another aircraft was preparing for the same destination. At Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands, KLM Flight 4805 was preparing for departure. Another Boeing 747. Same destination, Las Palmas. In this cockpit sat 50-year-old Captain Jacob van Zanton, one of KLM's most experienced and respected pilots. He was joined by 42-year-old First Officer Klaas Meurs and 48-year-old flight engineer Willem Schroeder. 11 flight attendants and 235 passengers completed the manifest. KLM Flight 4805 departed Amsterdam and headed south toward the Canary Islands. 2 Boeing 747s. 2 experienced crews, both heading to the same small airport in Paradise. Everything seemed routine, but at that very moment, in Las Palmas, 2 men were walking toward the airport terminal building. They placed a bag outside a flower shop, and then they vanished. Inside that bag, a bomb with a countdown timer. At exactly 1 p.m., the reception desk at Las Palmas Airport received a phone call. The voice on the other end identified himself as a member of the MPAIAC separatist group. His message was chilling and specific. In 15 minutes, a bomb will explode at Las Palmas Airport. Airport staff immediately sprang into action. Within those critical 15 minutes, they evacuated the entire terminal. Thousands of passengers and workers fled the building, and then ... Exactly 15 minutes later, a massive explosion. The blast tore through the terminal roof. Debris rained down onto the empty halls. Thanks to the evacuation, no one was killed, but the damage was severe. Las Palmas Airport was immediately shut down. All operations suspended, every flight cancelled or diverted, including 2 Boeing 747s that were now approaching the Canary Islands. KLM Flight 4805 was the first to arrive near Las Palmas. Air traffic control informed the crew about the explosion and instructed them to divert to Tenerife Island, a smaller airport located 68 miles away. At 1:38 p.m., KLM Flight 4805 landed on runway 30 at Tenerife Airport. Minutes later, Pan Am Flight 1736 also approached Las Palmas and received the same instructions: divert to Tenerife. Within hours, nearly every aircraft that had been heading to Las Palmas was being redirected to this small airport. Tenerife was the closest alternative, but it wasn't designed to handle this volume of traffic. Now, here's something critical to understand about Tenerife Airport. This wasn't a major international hub. It was a small regional airport nestled in the mountains at about 2,000 feet elevation. The Atlantic Ocean was close by, and the surrounding peaks created a dangerous weather phenomenon. Moist ocean air would hit the mountains, rise rapidly, cool down, and instantly form thick clouds and fog. This could happen suddenly without warning. One moment, visibility would be clear for miles. The next moment, you couldn't see 300 feet ahead. When KLM and Pan Am landed at Tenerife, visibility was perfect. But that was about to change. Passengers were allowed to disembark and stretch their legs, while crews waited for Las Palmas to reopen. Nobody knew how long the delay would last. KLM Flight 4805 was scheduled to return to Amsterdam after dropping passengers in Las Palmas. Captain Van Zanten made a decision. Refuel here at Tenerife. That way, when Las Palmas reopened, they could depart immediately without wasting time on the ground. It seemed like a smart, efficient choice, but it would prove to be a fatal one. Refueling began, but then news arrived. Las Palmas Airport had been cleared and was reopening. Both flights began preparing for departure. Passengers reboarded, but there was a problem. Tenerife Airport had only one runway, one taxiway, and one small apron where the terminal was located. The airport was never designed to handle multiple Boeing 747s simultaneously, and because KLM was still refueling on the taxiway, Pan Am couldn't access the runway. The taxiway was blocked. Pan Am would have to wait. Meanwhile, the weather was changing. Fog was beginning to roll in from the ocean. At 4:45 p.m., KLM's refueling was complete. Captain Van Zanten was ready to move. But because the apron was packed with other diverted aircraft, the taxiway was completely blocked. Air traffic control gave KLM unusual instructions. Taxi down the runway itself to the far eastern end, then make a 180-degree turn and prepare for takeoff. This was highly irregular. Aircraft normally use taxiways not active runways to reach their departure position. But with the congestion, there was no other option. KLM acknowledged and began taxiing down runway 30. Air traffic control then instructed Pan Am, follow KLM down the runway, but exit at taxiway Charlie 3 and hold on the taxiway. KLM will be taking off from this runway. Pan Am acknowledged and began following KLM. Through the thickening fog, visibility was deteriorating rapidly. Every passing minute made conditions worse. KLM reached the eastern end of the runway and executed a 180-degree turn. They were now in takeoff position, facing back down the runway toward the terminal. But Pan Am was still taxiing on that same runway, searching through the fog for taxiway. Pan Am's crew could see the first taxiway exit Charlie 1. They passed it. Then they saw Charlie 2. They passed that too, but Charlie 3 never appeared. Here's why. Charlie 3 angled back toward the terminal area, not away from it. In the fog, it didn't look like a proper taxiway exit. The crew assumed they'd recognize it when they saw it, but they didn't see it. Te mi said Italiano. Making matters worse, Tenerife Airport lacked proper runway signage and markings. Modern airports have clear, illuminated signs indicating taxiway exits. Tenerife had almost nothing, just faint paint markings on the tarmac that were invisible in thick fog. Pan Am continued taxiing down the runway, unknowingly passing Charlie, and at that exact moment, at the far end of the runway, KLM Captain Van Zanten was growing impatient. KLM was ready to go. Captain Van Zanten contacted air traffic control and requested takeoff clearance, and this is where everything started to unravel. Air traffic control began explaining KLM's departure route, the heading they should take after lift, but at no point in this transmission did the controllers say the words, "cleared for takeoff." That phrase is critical. It's the only authorization that allows an aircraft to begin its takeoff roll. But Captain Van Zanten heard what he expected to hear. He believed he'd been cleared for takeoff. He responded, "We are at takeoff." Or did he say, "We are taking off"? The exact wording remains unclear to this day, but the controller responded, "Okay." Then, after a brief pause, the controller added something crucial. "Stand by for takeoff. I will call you." This was clear. Do not take off yet. But that message never reached KLM's cockpit. At the exact moment, the controller said, "Stand by." Pan Am, still on the runway, searching for Charlie 3, transmitted their own message. "We are still on the runway." Both transmissions happened simultaneously. The radio signals interfered with each other. In KLM's cockpit, all they heard was garbled static. Captain Van Zanten, believing he had clearance, pushed the thrust levers forward. The four massive engines roared to life. The Boeing 747 began accelerating down the runway into the fog. In the KLM cockpit, flight engineer Willem Schroeder had heard Pan Am's transmission. He turned to Captain Van Zanten and said, "Is he not clear? That Pan American?" Captain Van Zanten barely acknowledged the question. Perhaps he didn't hear clearly over the engine noise. Perhaps he was too focused on the takeoff. He responded simply, "Oh yes," and he continued the takeoff roll. Through the fog, KLM could only see about 1,000 feet ahead. Everything beyond that was a white wall. On Terranway, Pan Am's crew suddenly saw lights through the fog. At first, they thought KLM was stationary waiting at the far end of the runway, but then they realized those lights were moving. Fast, directly toward them. Captain Grubbs screamed, "Get off! Get off! Get off!" First Officer Bragg shoved the thrust levers to maximum power and yanked the control yoke hard left, trying to turn the massive jet off the runway. But it was too late. KLM Captain Van Zanten also saw Pan Am at the last second emerging from the fog like a ghost. He pulled back hard on the controls, trying to lift off early and clear the aircraft below. The nose of KLM's 747 lifted. The front landing gear left the ground, but the rear of the aircraft, still heavy, with a full fuel load, couldn't climb fast enough. At 5:06 p.m., KLM's right engine and landing gear tore through Pan Am's upper fuselage. The impact ripped off the first-class section. KLM's landing gear collapsed. The aircraft slammed back onto the runway 500 feet later, sliding and tumbling in a massive fireball. The fuel tanks, completely full from the refueling at Tenerife, ignited instantly. The explosion was visible for miles. Everyone aboard KLM Flight 4805 died instantly. All 248 people, passengers and crew, perished in the fireball. On Pan Am Flight 1736, the first-class section was obliterated on impact. Those passengers had no chance. But in the economy section at the rear of the aircraft, some passengers survived the initial collision. The fuselage had cracked open, creating escape routes. People jumped from 20-foot heights onto the runway, scrambling away from the burning wreckage. Out of 396 people aboard Pan Am Flight 1736, only 61 survived. But the tragedy didn't end there. Because of the fog, air traffic control didn't initially realize what had happened. They couldn't see the runway. They only learned of the disaster when another aircraft parked at the terminal reported seeing flames on the runway. Rescue vehicles rushed toward the scene, but the fog slowed them down. Precious minutes were lost. By the time firefighters arrived, the flames had consumed everything. In the days and weeks that followed, investigators combed through the wreckage and analyzed both aircraft's cockpit voice recorders. The recordings revealed everything. Every transmission, every misunderstanding, every missed opportunity to prevent the disaster. The investigation identified a catastrophic chain of events. The bomb at Las Palmas forced the diversion to KLM's decision to refuel at Tenerife blocked the taxiway, preventing Pan Am from departing first. The sudden fog reduced visibility to near zero. Pan Am missed the Charlie 3 exit and remained on the runway. The simultaneous radio transmissions created garbled interference. KLM began takeoff without proper clearance. But ultimately, the investigation concluded that KLM bore primary responsibility. Captain Van Zanton had begun his takeoff role without explicit clearance. Even after his flight engineer questioned whether Pan Am was clear, he continued. Some believe Van Zanten was under pressure. KLM had strict duty time regulations, and the delays at Tenerife were pushing the crew close to their legal limits. If they didn't depart soon, they'd be grounded overnight, causing massive disruption. Others believe Van Zanten simply fell victim to expectation bias, hearing what he expected to hear rather than what was actually said. Whatever the cause, his decision cost 583 lives. It remains the deadliest accident in aviation history. The Tenerife disaster became a wake-up call for the entire aviation industry. In the aftermath, sweeping changes were implemented worldwide. Radio communication protocols. Standard phraseology became mandatory. Phrases like takeoff could only be used in specific contexts. Pilots were required to read back all clearances. Cockpit resource management. The concept of CRM was born from this disaster. Co-pilots and flight engineers were encouraged to speak up when they noticed problems, even if it meant challenging the captain's decisions. Ground radar systems. Airports were mandated to install surface movement radar, allowing controllers to see aircraft positions even in zero visibility. Runway markings and lighting. Clear, illuminated signs became standard at every major airport. Taxiway exits had to be clearly marked and visible in all weather conditions. Crew rest regulations. Airlines tightened duty time rules to prevent fatigue-related decision-making errors. These changes have saved countless lives in the decades since Tenerife. Today, Tenerife Island has 2 airports. The northern airport where the disaster occurred still operates, but has been extensively modernized with radar, lighting, and improved taxiway systems. A new airport was built in the south at lower elevation, where fog and clouds are far less common. Most international flights now use the southern facility. A memorial stands near the northern airport, honoring the 583 victims of that foggy afternoon in March 1977. For the families of those who died, the memorial offers little comfort. The pain of losing loved ones in a preventable accident never truly fades. But for the aviation industry, Tenerife serves as an eternal reminder. Communication is everything. Assumptions are deadly, and no matter how experienced the crew, no matter how routine the flight, vigilance must never waver. March 27, 1977. A foggy runway on a small island in the Atlantic. 2 Boeing 747s, both heading to the same destination, both crewed by experienced professionals, both following instructions, or at least believing they were, but a chain of small errors amidst garbled radio traffic. An assumption about clearance created a catastrophe that changed aviation forever. 583 people lost their lives because 2 aircraft occupied the same piece of runway at the same moment in time. The Tenerife Airport disaster remains the deadliest accident in aviation history. Not because of mechanical failure, not because of terrorism, but because of miscommunication. And that makes it all the more tragic. This has been nitrogen monoxide signal. Until next time, stay aware.